But they're not going to be Georgia. They're not going to be Alabama. They're not going to be Texas. What Oklahoma will be is Auburn, Ole Miss, Florida. Teams that are good enough to make some noise. Teams that are good enough to win the SEC once every, 3 years or so.
Not going to be Georgia, not going to be Alabama, not going to be Texas. We all know why these so-called college football and SEC experts do this. They're engagement farming. And it works pretty well when you take a shot at Oklahoma. We all know that because Oklahoma fans are going to come back at you when they feel like you're taking shots that are unnecessary at their program. But at what point do these experts, quote-unquote experts, begin to look exactly like what they are? Anything but experts who can't be trusted to give a smart or truthful answer whatsoever when it comes to picking winners and losers in college football, and in particular, the SEC, which I'm sure you've all heard by now is going to give the Oklahoma Sooners and Texas Longhorns a rude awakening when they take the field this fall. Welcome back to Hall of Fame College Football's Sooner Magic Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Watkins, and if you love college football, especially the Oklahoma Sooners, you're definitely in the right place. So before you forget, smash that red subscriber button, like our videos, and don't forget to ring the bell so you don't miss one moment of Hall of Fame College Football. Yeah, the trolls are out. The trolls are out. They've been out. They're going to be out. This is how it goes. We're coming into the SEC as the underdog, even out of the two Red River schools coming in, because Texas, stumbled into a playoff berth in its final year in the Big 12. Never mind the fact that they lost to Oklahoma in the Red River shootout and lost 11 people to the NFL draft, but they are a team that can come in and immediately win in the SEC. Oklahoma, not so much. And it's just, it's a lot of ridiculous reasons is what it is. And as much as it irks the heck out of me, and it does, as you folks that are in my audience have no doubt heard me say on a number of occasions, particularly when it comes to the difference between OU and Texas. We've talked about that ad nauseum. And, we constantly hear about just how brutal it is in the SEC from week to week. Now, we all know that the SEC is as top-heavy as anything else. But you're led to believe that it's not beating Georgia or beating Alabama or beating LSU or maybe Ole Miss or whoever is the flavor of the week this year, right? It's not beating that team. It's having to expend so much to beat that team and then turn around and play maybe a lower-level team the next week, but that still has SEC players on it, and they're going to end up biting you and taking you down. Okay. Whatever. There's a lot of reasons that people give. There's that depth. You don't have the line, the defensive line, or with Oklahoma, in their case right now, nobody's really saying much about the D line because they know it's pretty good. But they're questioning how good the offensive line is going to be because it's going to be brand new. They don't forget about the fact that they don't really know or don't care about who the offensive line coach is, what he's done, nor are they paying much attention to who they've gotten in recruiting over the past few years, the size of the kids that they've brought in, the fact that it's a young line, but that doesn't mean that it isn't going to be a good one. They don't pay a lot of attention to that. Then they'll throw out there those little things about your quarterback, Jackson Arnold. Now, I'll say this. If Dylan Gabriel had been coming into this season as the third-year starter of the Sooners. My guess is it would have been that he's never played in the SEC. He's been pretty good, but not great. His arm strength isn't great. He's not that good. The fact that he's at Oregon and nobody in the SEC is going to see him, you don't hear any of that. It's, he's possible Heisman Trophy winner, All-American. They're going to really miss him. And they start talking about Jackson Arnold, and it's the turnovers against Arizona in his first start, the bowl game. When a lot of times you get to talking about these bowl games and none of them matter. If it's about a team that they tend to like, then it doesn't matter. You know, like Texas, who they love, it doesn't matter that even in the playoff game and the year before, Quinn Ewers struggled against Washington. He was awful in the playoff game, and they tried to hand the game to the Longhorns after pretty much dominating it the entire time. From the 12-yard line, he doesn't even try to throw it into the end zone. These are the kind of things that you're going to hear over and over and over again. And that's fine. At least if you're going to cite or something as a reason, a real reason why you believe Oklahoma isn't going to be good, I'm okay with listening to it. I may not agree with you. In fact, I probably won't if you're going to sit here and tell me that Oklahoma is going to be a mid-level, every once in a while contender, but never going to be good enough to win, as you're going to hear right here from, once again, Barrett Sallee.
What's the ceiling for Oklahoma in the SEC? Considering the recruiting that goes on, just consider geography and where they are in relation to the best players in the country. I just don't see it. I just don't see it. Now, there could be a year or two where they catch fire in the portal and become what Oklahoma was in the Big 12, a team that can make the playoff, but certainly not capable of winning it. And that's fine. But they're not going to be Georgia. They're not going to be Alabama. They're not going to be Texas.
Just consider geography, he says, and where they are in relation to the best players in the country. I just don't see it. I just don't see it. Well, Barrett, if you look at this map, and this map here represents which states have produced the most recruits over the last 4 decades. So we're talking 1980 to 2022. Texas and California are the top 2. It looks like the shading wise, because it's anywhere between, from what they're showing here on this legend, it is anywhere from 1,000 to 13,000, 13,000 being the darkest blue. So somewhere between 11 and 13,000 is Texas. This is, geographically speaking, precisely where, if you see my little deal here, this is Oklahoma right here, Oklahoma City, Norman, and directly below, less than 200 miles away, in fact, it's less than 150 miles away, is the Texas border, which they get the bulk of their recruits from. This year, they've also pulled a bunch of those recruits from the state of California. Coming up in these classes in 25, 26, there are a lot of California kids coming and going to Oklahoma. Over the last 3 cycles since Brent Venables arrived in Norman, they've also got a number of players out of the state of Florida, which is known as the Speed State. Guys like Makari Vickers, guys like Lewis Carter, top 100 defensive players. They're getting them. According to this map here, the top 100 players from the 2024 class, Texas leads the way with 18 of the top 100. Georgia coming in second with 17. Florida with 16. California with 14. And then it's spread out between 4. Well, you had one with 4, 1 or 2 with 3, bunch of 2s and 1s throughout the country. So, geographically speaking, Barrett, you're full of shit. Next up, when you say things like because of the roster, it looks even worse. As you can see in 2023, this is the year that they got Jackson Arnold, 5-star National Player of the Year, high school football player out of Denton Guyer in Texas, along with his teammate and fellow 5-star safety Peyton Bowen. This is also the year that they had PJ Adebawari, who was a top 5 overall pick edge rusher in the class. And they come in at number 5 overall. Then you go to last year, which Coach Venables believes is his best season, but they come in at number 8 for the 2024 class, only getting the 1 5-star in David Stone. That's a 5-star defensive lineman. They added his teammate from IMG Academy, who shot up the recruit rankings and is expected to actually contend for a starter spot probably a little before David Stone, Jaden Jackson, along with 3 other blue chip defensive line prospects headed by Nigel Smith, who had, offers from Ohio State, Alabama, Texas A&M, Penn State, pretty much everywhere in the country that he wanted to go, he could have went to. Same with Jaden Jackson. You also had Danny Okoye, who was the MVP of the Alabama camp, edge rush guy, who was a little bit underrated because of the fact that he played in a less known league in Oklahoma after the pandemic, where, more of a homeschool league, but all-American type of guy that Nick Saban was recruiting pretty hard. I mean, this is a class that they're just building and building and building with. Or I'm sorry, they're 20 commits in the 2025 class. They've got them at number 8. So I was showing 7 there for a second. I guess it just hadn't moved. You've seen them as high, depending on which one you're looking at, as number 3 in the last couple of weeks with some of these commitments. We're going to find out where they end up, but they are well within the expectations to get into that top 10, possibly in the top 5, depending on how some of these offensive line things go with guys like Michael Fasusi, 5-star, and where some of them end up in the rankings after all, is said and done. But when you look at these guys, they're still recruiting on a high level. So it doesn't make a ton of sense what Barrett's talking about, saying geographically speaking, because of the fact, number one, as we just established, right above the most fertile recruiting ground in the country. Not to mention the fact they have a pipeline into probably the second best in Florida because of Brent Venables' time at Clemson and the guys that he recruited to be on some of the best defenses in recent memory in college football. National championship defenses, 2 of them at Clemson. Then they had, that one at Oklahoma as well in his second year that they recruited. Look, these guys just continue to do their thing when it comes to recruiting on the defensive side of the ball. They're also doing it on offense too. But, don't let facts get in the way of your theories there, Barrett.
What Oklahoma will be is Auburn, Ole Miss, Florida. Teams that are good enough to make some noise. Teams that are good enough to win the SEC once every, 3 years or so. Florida's been there with Kyle Trask. Auburn has been there consistently. Hell, Auburn in 2017 was 1 win away from making the playoff as a 2-loss team. So that's what Oklahoma can be. And that's fine. That's fine. That's the expectation that needs to exist in Norman. And I know that you probably hate to hear that, Sooner fans. But that's just reality. You're not going to be the big dog. You're not going to be that team that everybody just defaults to as one that will contend for the SEC because of the roster. That's not how this is going to work. Now, I love Brent Venables. Can they be a 9-win team pretty much every season? Yeah. I think that might be a little aggressive, but it's possible.
And I don't understand what this dude's beef is. I really don't. But what I'm The conclusion I'm coming to with him, though, is like a lot of these guys, he just doesn't take the time to actually look and do any kind of research before he speaks. He thinks that he's already made it as a national correspondent, analyst, whatever the hell you want to call it, in college football. He's covered enough of these games that he just knows who people are from year to year. It's never going to change. It's never going to get any different. Now, if you listen to what somebody like Josh Pate says, which I've said this a lot of times, I think Pate's a world-class fence sitter. He's not one to really badmouth anybody. But the thing is, if you heard what he said the other day, and it's funny that it came out right after Barrett Sallee said this, but Pate himself said, well, if you think that they're so much worse than Texas, here's the truth. Over the last 5 years, Texas has recruited on average 7th in the country, 7.5. Oklahoma's right around 9. Recruiting rankings, his first season when he took over the program, he had a month and a half to go ahead and lock in his recruiting class. They finished number 8. Year 2, when he got 5-star quarterback and National Player of the Year Jackson Arnold, along with 5-star safety Peyton Bowen, along with 5-star defensive end edge rusher PJ Adebaware, they recruited the number 4 class in the country. Then this past year, Venables himself says it's his best class to date. According to the rankings, it was number 8. Now, we could sit here and go through all these players and all that stuff, but that's not the point. The point is, Texas has been yay ahead. Pate said himself when it comes to the portal, Oklahoma's portal rankings are better than Texas. And not for nothing, they beat Texas now 5 out of the last 6 times, 8 out of the last 10, and so on and so forth. As we all know, we always beat Texas. This is just what Oklahoma does. But according to Barrett, you're not going to be Georgia, you're not going to be Bama, and you're not going to be Texas. Texas loses 11 players to the draft, similar to, Michigan losing its 13 players to the draft, and nobody thinks Michigan is going to be anywhere near what they've been over the last few years. Texas loses 11, 2 less, and it's just plug and play. It's pretty clear that, as Josh Pate said, a lot of it comes down to bias. And why everybody loves Texas, we could sit here and pontificate about that all damn day. For whatever reason, that brand seems to get everybody up in arms, and they just love it when Texas is good. Okay. But yet they hardly ever are. When it comes to Oklahoma, here's one thing. He's talking about this, and I kind of went at him about this on Twitter. Barrett Sallee was saying this stuff, and I went at him about, okay, when are you going to do some actual, because I just rattled off exactly what 8 for 8, and they're in the top 5 right now recruiting-wise. When are you going to actually do a little bit of research, Barrett? Instead of just continuing with this narrative that Lincoln Riley was the straw that stirred the drink in Norman, and now that he's in Southern California, they can't be that good. He said, that's actually the opposite of what I think about Lincoln Riley. But go ahead, King. First of all, how weird is it for one man to call another man king? Weird. Okay? Weird. But number 2, we know better than that because of this next clip right here.
I didn't realize that these two hated each other to the level they do. So I'm trying to get you in trouble here, Barrett. Who has a brighter future moving forward in the SEC? Oklahoma under Venables or Missouri under Drinkwitz?
Missouri. I think Missouri does. And I've gone back and forth with Oklahoma, man. I don't know about you. I've just kind of gone back and forth. Like, what can they be? We all know that Oklahoma has contended for national. Well, I say contended. They've at least in theory contended, right? But that was with a situation with Lincoln Riley where the method worked to a point, right? They had the ceiling. Now, the national championship ceiling was way higher, but the ceiling was still pretty high, right? You don't have Lincoln. You're not bringing in superstar quarterbacks. I can't wait to see what Jackson Arnold does this year, but you aren't bringing in those Heisman caliber quarterbacks. And defensively, yeah, you've taken a step up, obviously, with Brent Venables. And sort of like we joke about LSU, you're not god awful defensively. So that's certainly a step up from those Lincoln Riley teams. But is that enough? Is that the right recipe for success in the SEC? Because if Brent Venables doesn't succeed, doesn't have that ultra dynamic offense, are those transfer quarterbacks going to want to go there? Or high school quarterbacks going to want to go there? No, they're not going to have that selling point, right? They're not going to have.
So because Lincoln Riley's not there, they're not going to be able to bring in either transfer quarterbacks or high school quarterbacks that are on that elite level like they did when Lincoln was there. And so without that, maybe they can play good enough defense because of Venables, but they're not going to be able to bring in those guys. Okay. Again, this is where I go back to do some research, Barrett. Do some freaking research before you start talking about this stuff. Because let's be clear about this. Oklahoma, not only did they get Jackson Arnold, they turn around in the next recruiting cycle and they get Michael Hawkins. Not to mention Brandon Zerberg, 2 4-star quarterbacks, high ceiling, 4-star Heisman type quarterbacks. This 25 class, they've already had Kevin Sperry, who was an Elite 11 finalist, and will certainly move up into the high 4-star numbers, but will probably fall short of 5-star, which doesn't really matter. He hadn't been a big camp guy, but throws it as good as anybody we've seen. Oh, and not to mention, they just picked up a commitment from a kid out of California, 5-star named O'Neal, right in Lincoln's backyard. This kid, Mr. O'Neal, has a ranking in no higher than the top 160 players in the country. 247 has him as the 91st overall and number 6 quarterback in the country. ESPN has him at 84th in the country, the 3rd overall quarterback. And Rivals has him at number 63 overall and number 5 in the 2026 recruiting class. With most everybody saying that chances are this kid can move up and become a 5-star. He's still got his junior season to go. Not to mention next year, his senior season before he comes in. Now, that's a long time down the road, okay? We're still talking about this season plus next season before you get him into camp. But this is how it goes with quarterbacks these days, is they commit early. Now, could you see him flip? Of course you could. Could you see Kevin Sperry flip? Sure. So if you have this kind of competition and you're recruiting at every level this way, let's talk about the safeties. Let's talk about the linebackers. Let's talk about the defensive line. Let's talk about the fact that Bill Bedenbaugh, the offensive line coach, has more offensive linemen in the NFL than any coach in college football today. Let's talk about the fact that Emmett Jones is out recruiting every wide receiver coach in the country, aside from Brian Hartline at Ohio State. Let's talk about the fact that DeMarco Murray got the number 1 running back in the country, not Lincoln Riley, but DeMarco Murray and Taylor Tatum this past cycle, along with Xavier Robinson, along with Caleb Hicks, Javante Barnes, former 3-star Gavin Sawchuk, not to mention Sam Franklin, who was the number 1 FCS running back in the country a year ago that they pulled in through the portal. I'm having a hard time getting the explanation here, guys. I really am. Because you can just go through and say stupid shit just to say it. It's a lot of the same stuff that we've heard from guys like Matt Moscona down at LSU, who, yeah, he kind of takes a couple of little shots at Oklahoma, but not so much. But right now he's on his Alabama kick, doing things like, saying things like Keelan Russell is a 3-star quarterback that they stole from SMU, and good grief, before they would be taking them from the other blue bloods in the college football, and now they're stealing from guys like SMU. How far have they fallen at Alabama? Guys, Alabama still has one of the top 2 talent rosters in the country. Never mind whether or not Nick Saban is there or not. There's a reason why I say things like, I ain't going to be the one to predict the downfall of the Crimson Tide. And it's not because I like a lot of those creators. I know better. I want to know why guys like Barrett Sallee don't know better than to go against Oklahoma. Because here is the deal. If for some reason Brent Venables is not the guy that we all believe he is, let's say he's doing a great job of recruiting, but he never puts it together as a head coach, becomes that CEO type of guy that can, guide a team through an entire season, win an SEC title, win a national title. Let's say he doesn't get that done. Chances are we're probably going to have about 4 more years of it before we find out whether or not. If they win one, then obviously we know our answer. But if they don't, he's going to get 4 more shots at it to let us know that. Unless it just, really fell off the edge of a cliff. We've seen improvements year from year, from one year to the next year, and we're seeing different things that we think is going to equate to another improvement this year. Now, what does an improvement look like? It could look like a number of things. But what it doesn't look like is a mid-level team in the SEC or any conference, because that's not how they're recruiting. Barrett Sallee's going to tell you one thing, but all you really got to do is just go look at the recruiting rankings and the transfer portal rankings, and different. At some point, what you say has to matter. At some point, putting yourself out there has to matter. At what point do guys like this say things like that and it hurts them down the line because they're so completely wrong and they didn't even try to do their research? At some point, it has to matter. You let me know what you think about this. I know this is kind of ran a little bit long, but I got to understand it. I love it that they're giving us stuff to talk about later on. I love it that we got that receipt for the end of the year. But at some point, is that receipt really going to matter for everywhere else? Is it going to hurt his engagement? Are people going to stop listening and watching his show? Are they going to stop listening to and watching his show? If you just want to go by 5 stars and only 5 stars, okay, fine. Then you can say those things if you want to. But if you're recruiting in the top 10, that's really all you have to do. The blue chip ratio, which has not been wrong since 2000. If you don't have at least 50%, but it's really 60% because only 2 teams since 2000 that didn't have 60% or more 4 or 5 star players on their roster have won the national championship. Clemson, their first time they did it in 2016. And then this past season, Michigan, they were both in the 50s, the 50%. Everybody else has been over 60% blue chip ratio. Oklahoma is ranked, I believe, number 5, 6, 7, maybe, but they're 1 ahead of Texas. They're just 1 behind Texas A&M, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia. Ahead of LSU, ahead of Florida, ahead of Texas. But they're right up there. So at least you got to do some freaking, just one time, do a little research before you start talking, or you just look like what you are. You're a troll. You're just engagement farming. And if that's the case, fine. But if you don't have to come out there and show that and say, I was way off. They actually do get it down there in Norman. Coach Venables is really that good. And they're recruiting on that level. Look, a lot of people said that Georgia would never be what Georgia is. Under Kirby Smart even. Until Kirby won his national championship, most people were questioning him. And now he's just the best coach in the country without a close second. Okay, fine. I'm not saying he's not one of the best coaches or maybe even the best coach. But if you're going to tell me that what Brent Venables isn't one of the best coaches in the country, I'm going to tell you you're crazy, because he's been one of the best coaches in the country for a very long time. He happened to be a defensive coordinator, but he knows what it takes. And he has recruiting chops to prove that he can put together the right roster. He said in that piece, roster-wise, it's just not going to happen. Okay, well, then that tells you that he's not looking at the truth. You guys let me know what you think. See you on the next one.